The incident that took place on August 11th, 2002 in Louisville, Kentucky was truly disturbing. Detective Duncan was called to the Churchill Park Apartments to investigate a case of assault. The victim, a woman who had been terrorized in every possible way, was fortunate to have her 8-year-old son unharmed in the next room. Upon arrival, the detective was approached by the victim's frightened boyfriend, who handed him his phone, indicating that the perpetrator was on the line. What followed was a chilling conversation that would mark a turning point in the case. The notorious Crafty rapist had managed to evade capture for 14 years, leaving no clues behind. However, a crucial mistake would eventually lead to his downfall, revealing his true identity and putting an end to his reign of terror. Let us delve deeper into the details to uncover the truth. The case commences with the first identified victim, Shannon Johnson. On the 28th of February, 1998, Shannon, a 29-year-old woman, resided with her daughter in the vicinity of 5101 Crafty Drive. In the depths of the night, she abruptly awakened to a distressing sight, sensing the weight of an unknown individual upon her. The man held Shannon at knife point, attempting to violate her, seizing authority over her physical being. In a matter of seconds, Shannon's concerns shifted towards the safety and well-being of her child. "I grabbed the knife with this hand, by the blade, and then we started fighting. We struggled for a minute, maybe even less than a minute, and then he stops," said Shannon in an interview. He hurriedly made his way towards the door, hastily pulling up his pants as he began to run. Without wasting any time, Shannon immediately called 911 after checking on her daughter. The local police were promptly dispatched to the scene, and unfortunately, this case seemed all too familiar. Just under 2 weeks ago, on February 16th, a woman had been attacked in the same apartment complex. During the interrogation, Shannon mentioned that she could identify the assailant as African American based on the texture of his hair, which was closely cropped and short. Additionally, he was slightly taller than her. The description provided by Shannon matched the information from the previous assault cases perfectly. However, investigators were at a loss as there was no incidental evidence to work with. All the crime scenes were meticulously clean, devoid of any fingerprints or DNA. These circumstances left the police with no alternative but to proceed without a suspect. In the neighboring area of Crafty Drive, Terry Poe, a 56-year-old woman, would wake up around 3 a.m., only to find herself being pinned down by an unknown man. The elderly woman was horrified to realize that he was attempting to take advantage of her. Terry couldn't recall if she had been kneed or struck in the stomach, but the man managed to overpower her and explicitly threatened to assault her. "I don't know if he kneed me or he hit me in the stomach, but he just doubled me up and he said, 'I'm going to rape you.'" He forcefully pressed her against the couch, placing the sharp blade of his knife against her throat. Terry recounted that initially, he would inflict small cuts on her to make it clear that any resistance would result in her death. He proceeded to tear off the buttons on her clothing, followed by removing her entire pajama set. With himself positioned on top, he menacingly commanded Terry to obey his every instruction. The apartment was devoid of any other occupants, and she understood that she had no choice but to accept her grim destiny. Despite being pinned to the couch, Terry did her utmost to comply with the enraged assailant. Throughout the night, she endured the relentless assault as the man repeatedly violated her. Once he had finished, he stealthily exited through the back door, vanishing into the darkness. Detective Larry Carroll from the Louisville Metro Police Department was summoned to the scene as an evidence technician. The crime had occurred on the streets of 5102, just a few blocks away from Shannon's apartment. Larry immediately recognized the familiar pattern of the crime and was certain that it was the work of the notorious perpetrator. The Crafty rapist was the name given to him by the police department. However, the cases suddenly came to a halt, leaving Detective Larry puzzled about the perpetrator's whereabouts. They were unsure if he had been imprisoned elsewhere or if he had relocated to another state. The sudden cessation of these attacks remained a mystery. 7 months passed without any new leads. In September of 1998, Detective Dwayne Colbank, responsible for robbery cases at the Louisville Metro Police Department, was assigned to investigate 2 assaults at BP gas stations. These incidents shared similarities with the Crafty Drive assaults. DNA samples confirmed that a single man was responsible for both sets of attacks, leading investigators to dub him the BP oil rapist. Colbank was convinced that there was a connection between the BP oil case and the Crafty Drive case. The investigation team was confident in their belief that they were pursuing the same individual. The BP oil station was located just 4 miles away from Crafty Drive, further supporting their theory. The neighborhood of Louisville was not accustomed to serial stranger assaults, making the pattern of these cases all the more unusual. After 4 years of silence, the dangerous assailant struck again on August 11, 2002. Detective Larry Duncan hurriedly arrived at the Churchill Park Apartments, where a woman in her mid-30s had been physically assaulted and terrorized by an elusive predator. The incident occurred the previous night in her own apartment, while she was peacefully sleeping next to her 8-year-old son. Although the child remained unharmed, the woman endured a harrowing assault. To protect their identities, the names of the family members and victims have been withheld. As Duncan made his way to the scene, he had a gut feeling, but little did he know that what awaited him would be one of the most intense situations he had ever encountered. Upon entering, he was greeted by the frantic boyfriend of the victim. The boyfriend of the victim walked up to me and handed me his cell phone, saying, "He's on the line." Of course, I asked, "Who's on the line?" And he said, "The guy that did it." Duncan was taken aback when he heard the man describe himself, carefully concealing his identity to avoid revealing any personal information. Over the course of the next 15 minutes, Detective Duncan listened as the sadistic predator detailed the severity of his crime in a disturbingly graphic manner. Duncan's shock went beyond mere surprise. It was unsettling to witness a man confess to such heinous acts with a sense of pride. Interrupting him, Duncan asked, "Why would you commit such atrocities?" To which the man replied, "It's just something I do." The man on the other end of the line let out a dismissive scoff and added, "Simply because I can. It's just part of who I am." The sheer confidence and nonchalance in his tone shook the detective to his core. The call abruptly ended shortly thereafter. This case was unlike anything Duncan had encountered before, and the entire team was diligently searching for evidence and analyzing forensics. They began by investigating the point of entry, the broken living room screen and window frame. Remarkably, in the very first location Duncan searched, he discovered the most pristine fingerprints he could have hoped for. These were the fingerprints of the serial rapist. Without hesitation, he returned to the station, eagerly awaiting the results of the analysis. Finally, the investigation had obtained their first crucial piece of evidence, and Duncan was confident that they were closing in on the perpetrator. The fingerprint was promptly processed through the automated fingerprint identification system. However, the investigation soon took an unexpected turn. Along with the victim's cell phone, the perpetrator had also stolen her ATM card. The card was swiftly entered into the system, and the entire team embarked on a mission to determine where the card would be used next. Multiple CCTV footages from various locations around the city were collected in an effort to identify the perpetrator. From department stores to parking lots, all eyes in the city were on high alert. Eventually, the perpetrator was caught on camera using the stolen card for a transaction in a parking space, providing a clear and wide view of his face. Within a matter of hours, the entire investigation team was mobilized for a manhunt. All the captured images were displayed on various screens, including newspapers and television. The news broadcasts were on high alert throughout Louisville. Duncan was confident that someone would definitely recognize him. The images were too clear to go unnoticed, and moreover, the distinctive T-shirt he was wearing made him easily identifiable. The very next day, an anonymous informant alerted the police after seeing his face on television, identifying him as Daniel Gene Cummings. Cummings was a local resident with a criminal record of felony charges. Although his fingerprints did not match any records in the automated fingerprint identification system, Cummings' fingerprints were already on file with the local police. The examination confirmed a perfect match. The fingerprints found at the crime scene undoubtedly belonged to him. Finally, on August 29, 2002, at the Louisville Metro Police Department, the serial rapist, Daniel Gene Cummings, was brought in for questioning. Daniel had a total of 53 charges against him, including multiple counts of assault, sodomy, and burglary, as well as related charges of robbery, illegal use of a credit card, and kidnapping. These charges were listed in 3 separate indictments that were eventually consolidated. The assault incidents occurred between February 1998 and August 2002. Daniel had a previous record of nuisance crimes, including alcohol intoxication, disorderly conduct, and some serious felonies. The assaults were mostly carried out at knife point. In one particular case, he was found pouring bleach over a victim in an attempt to destroy any potential evidence. The victims were of different races and ranged in age from their late 20s to early 50s. According to Sergeant Jack, there was no immediate connection between Daniel and the victims, except for one common factor. He seemed to target a specific segment of society that could be described as counterculture lifestyles. Daniel Cummings was taken into custody in early September and chose to exercise his Miranda rights. Detectives Brian Arnold, Larry Duncan, and Will Fong were assigned to the case and began questioning Daniel with the tape recorder on. However, the interrogation was paused when Daniel requested legal counsel. Detective Arnold respected his request and turned off the recording, staying with Daniel while Detective Duncan stepped out. Despite Daniel initiating a conversation with Detective Arnold, the detective reminded him of his rights, and the conversation was kept off the record. Detectives Duncan and Will Fong monitored the conversation from outside the room. Eventually, Detective Duncan instructed Will Fong to return and question Daniel about additional charges. The tape recorder was turned back on, and Daniel ended up making incriminating statements that led to his court appearance. During the court trials, Daniel Cummings made a motion to suppress the statements. Detectives Arnold and Duncan testified that they reminded Daniel of his Miranda rights twice before continuing with the session, and he voluntarily waived them. The interrogation then proceeded without the tape recorder. Daniel strongly maintained that he did not confess or initiate any conversation with Detective Arnold, contrary to what was mentioned. There was also an alleged testimony that Detective Duncan had threatened him and his family, while their records were kept off the Commonwealth. At the sentencing, the judge announced the term of years for each count: 10 years for each of the 3 counts of sodomy in the first degree, and 10 years for each of the 4 counts of robbery in the first degree. The trial court rejected his appeal and testimony, focusing on the absence of any evidence of coercion, threat, or discomfort in the 175-page transcript of the interrogation. Eventually, Daniel Cummings pleaded guilty with no other option after being cornered by the prosecutors. He was sentenced to 470 years of imprisonment with a $100,000 bond. The relatives of the victims, who had suffered greatly, finally found solace in knowing that the perpetrator was behind bars and would not be released any time soon. Although these families will forever carry the scars of such heinous acts, the detectives were relieved that they were able to provide some measure of comfort by apprehending the culprit and ensuring that justice prevailed. Daniel's sentence stands as one of the longest in the history of Kentucky, with no possibility of parole in the near future. Maurice Anne Chivarella was born on November 25, 1954, to Mary and Carmen Chivarella. Unfortunately, Maurice did not make it to school on a fateful morning. She disappeared during her half-mile walk from home to school. Concern grew when she did not show up at school and missed her usual lunchtime return home. Worried family members quickly contacted the authorities and gathered all relatives to start searching. Later that day, around 1 p.m., a man giving driving lessons to his 16-year-old nephew near Hazleton Municipal Airport stumbled upon what seemed to be a large doll in a coal mining pit. Upon closer inspection, he realized it was a lifeless body and immediately informed the police. Detectives from the Pennsylvania State Police arrived, confirming it was Maurice's body. The coal mining pit where she was found was about 2 miles from her home. Tragically, Maurice had been bound with her own shoelaces, hands and ankles secured, and a colorful scarf stuffed into her mouth. Detectives could see she had suffered a terrible assault and was strangled to death. With heavy hearts, they delivered the devastating news to Maurice's family. The Civarella household descended into chaos, with Maurice's father, Carmen, appearing numb and the family doctor prescribing sedatives to Mary to help her cope with the loss of her 9-year-old daughter. While the family mourned, detectives began investigating Maurice's murder, learning that neighbors had seen her rushing along West 4th Street on the cold morning of March 18th, heading to St. Joseph's School. The concerned neighbors kindly offered Maurice a rest and suggested she seek shelter indoors to escape the cold, but she persisted in her determination to deliver the canned goods to her school before the morning mass. During the investigation led by the Pennsylvania State Police, the suspects included a priest who had previously aroused suspicions of involvement in a murder case in Bristol, Pennsylvania, as well as a local exhibitionist. While the priest was questioned and eventually cleared of any wrongdoing, the exhibitionist tragically took his own life after being asked to undergo a polygraph test. 3 days after the horrific murder, a funeral was held for Maurice, and she was laid to rest on Saturday, March 21st, 1964, in St. Joseph Slovak Roman Catholic Cemetery in Hazleton, Pennsylvania. Despite the tireless efforts of over 250 members of the Pennsylvania State Police and a case file spanning a staggering 4,700 pages, no arrests were made in Maurice's case. Eventually, the investigation went cold. It wasn't until 2007 when advancements in forensic technology allowed the state's DNA lab to extract the suspect's DNA profile from bodily fluids found on Maurice's jacket that the case was reignited. This breakthrough filled investigators with hope that they had finally found the key to solving the case. However, their optimism was short-lived when the DNA failed to match any profiles in the existing databases. Undeterred by this setback, law enforcement officers diligently continued to cross-reference the DNA profile with records of known criminals, conducting monthly checks in the hopes of finding a match. Unfortunately, their efforts yielded no results. The case remained stagnant, and Maurice's killer remained unidentified until almost 11 years later, when a breakthrough emerged in 2018. Pennsylvania investigators turned to Parabon Nanolabs, a renowned Virginia-based company specializing in DNA analysis. Parabon Nanolabs utilized state-of-the-art snapshot DNA technology to generate an incredibly detailed phenotype of the perpetrator. This phenotype provided valuable insights into the suspect's ancestral background, including descriptive information such as eye color, hair color, and other physical attributes. Equipped with this invaluable information, law enforcement authorities uploaded the DNA profile to GEDmatch, a public genealogy database that allowed individuals to explore their potential biological relatives. Through this innovative approach, detectives successfully identified their first genealogical match, who turned out to be a distant relative, possibly a 6th cousin of the suspect. Without wasting any time, the state police released composite images of a potential suspect at different ages, ranging from 25 to 60 years old, based on the comprehensive DNA analysis. In 2020, a renowned genealogist named Eric Schubert, a college student with exceptional expertise in genetic genealogy, reached out to the state police, offering his assistance free of charge. Despite his young age of 28 at the time, Schubert had already conducted genealogy research for over a decade and had assisted in solving cold cases in Chicago and the Philadelphia area over the past 2 years. After coming across the Civarella case, Schubert contacted the state police, expressing his desire to help while ensuring he wasn't overstepping any boundaries. His reputation for making invaluable contributions to law enforcement agencies on various cold cases had preceded him. Upon learning about the ongoing efforts to solve Maurice's murder through a local newspaper, Schubert felt compelled to offer his assistance. He had confidence in his abilities and was eager to contribute in any way possible. Impressed by Schubert's track record and his unwavering determination to help solve Maurice's case, Pennsylvania detectives welcomed him onto their team. Prior to his collaboration with the state police, Schubert underwent a rigorous vetting process, ensuring his credibility and expertise. Investigator Barron, the lead investigator on the Maurice Chivarella case, orchestrated a meeting with Schubert at a charming coffee shop nestled within the campus grounds. Engrossed in the details of the case, they exchanged thoughts and ideas, meticulously documenting Schubert's invaluable insights. As the meeting drew to a close, the detectives were captivated by Schubert's profound understanding, instilling a renewed sense of purpose and optimism within the team. With unwavering determination, the investigation surged forward, propelled by Schubert's unwavering commitment. Schubert's initial contact with Detective Barron began with office phone calls, gradually transitioning to text messages and eventually evolving into cell phone conversations. However, it was the sheer magnitude of emails, brimming with leads and information, that truly distinguished Schubert's involvement. Without hesitation, he maintained constant communication, leaving no stone unturned. Schubert described the process of utilizing genealogy to track down the killer as an exhaustive exercise in elimination, a testament to his meticulous approach. With the crime scene sample uploaded to the genealogy website by the state police, a vast array of potential leads emerged, presenting a daunting task. In 2020, Schubert embarked on extensive research, meticulously identifying possible relatives of the suspects, and dutifully shared his findings with Detective Barron. The detective, in turn, pursued each lead with unwavering dedication, employing DNA analysis to eliminate suspects one by one. Over the course of the next 2 years, authorities conducted a multitude of interviews and painstakingly collected DNA samples from the families under investigation. Schubert, ever diligent, continued to request additional DNA samples and meticulously examine distant genetic matches, leaving no avenue unexplored throughout the extensive 2-year investigation. Schubert faced a perplexing challenge, but he remained determined to uncover the truth in Maurice's case. Despite the demands of his college schedule, he dedicated an impressive amount of time, around 20 hours per week, for a staggering 18 months. Schubert meticulously examined every lead until his focus honed in on a local bartender named James Paul Forte. Surprisingly, James Paul Forte had never been considered a suspect in Maurice's murder until now. The task of narrowing down the suspects became even more daunting for Schubert as he delved into the intricate web of family trees. Initially, the abundance of DNA samples played a crucial role in narrowing the list down to 4 individuals. However, Forte's profile drew particular attention due to his previous criminal history. By utilizing the obtained samples, they were able to narrow down the potential suspects to 4 individuals. One of them had a prior arrest record in 1974 by the Pennsylvania State Police and again in 1978 by the Hazleton City Police Department. Armed with this information and the ability to eliminate the other 3 suspects, they identified their primary suspect. Leveraging his expertise, Schubert meticulously constructed approximately 50 comprehensive family trees in search of a connection to Hazleton. Eventually, he traced Fort's lineage back to his grandfather, who had immigrated from Italy to Hazleton in 1904. Schubert then diligently sought out descendants who had resided in the Hazleton area during the time of Maurice's tragic death. Eventually, Forte and his brother emerged as the main suspects, although both of them had already passed away. Fortunately, investigators were able to locate the brother's widow, who provided an old hairbrush belonging to her late husband. A conclusive DNA test ruled out Forte's brother, leaving James Paul Forte as the sole remaining suspect. The evidence regarding Forte's involvement was compelling enough to initiate legal proceedings for the exhumation of his remains. Since Forte was unmarried and had no children, it was necessary to exhume his body in order to obtain a DNA sample for an accurate comparison with the suspect's genetic profile. On January 6, 2022, Forte's body was exhumed to obtain the required DNA sample, which would be compared to the DNA found on Maurice's jacket nearly 58 years ago. After a thorough forensic analysis, the DNA extracted from Maurice's clothing yielded a positive match to Forte's genetic profile. On February 3, 2022, the probability of the DNA not belonging to him was extremely low, confirming his involvement in the crime. Working closely with the Len County District Attorney's Office, investigators definitively identified Forte as the perpetrator behind Maurice's tragic death. James Paul Fort, a native of Hazleton, had worked as a bartender and bar supply salesman in the area. He was born and raised in Hazleton and had spent his entire life there. At the time of Maurice's murder, Fort was 22 years old and lived only a few blocks away from her residence. He had no known familial or social connections to her family. However, Forte had a history of violence, as evidenced by prior arrests on charges ranging from public indecency and assault to reckless endangerment and harassment. In 1980, at the age of 38, Forte passed away from a reported heart attack while on duty at the bar where he worked. On February 12, 2022, law enforcement officially announced James Paul Forte as the perpetrator responsible for the assault and murder of Maurice Ann Chivarella as she was on her way to school in Hazleton, Pennsylvania. It was confirmed that Forte had not been implicated in the initial investigation of the homicide. During the press conference, authorities unveiled details from their conversation with the victim whom Fort attacked in 1974. The victim recounted the harrowing incident as the most brutal encounter of her life. Police emphasized the likelihood that this may not have been Forte's only offense and urged those with pertinent information to come forward. The search for Maurice's killer spanned multiple generations of state police investigators with over 230 department members involved in the inquiry at different stages. However, Forte's name did not emerge until the very end. Detectives also revealed that Maurice's murder was Pennsylvania's oldest cold case and the fourth oldest in the nation to be solved through genetic genealogy. Despite taking nearly 58 years to resolve, I believe this should inspire hope in the families of victims statewide and nationwide. The emotionally charged press conference was attended by officials who had worked on the case for decades and members of the Chivarella family, including Maurice's brother, Ronald. Ronald expressed that now that he and his family knew the identity of his little sister's killer, there was a sense of closure for everyone. While the Chivarella family will always feel the void and grief of Maurice's absence, the knowledge that the perpetrator was no longer alive and could not harm other young girls brought them solace. Although Maurice had been gone for many years, her cherished memories would endure in the hearts of the Chivarella family forever. Maurice's parents, Mary and Carmen, sought justice rather than revenge or punishment, and justice had finally been served. Unfortunately, neither of Maurice's parents lived to witness this moment. They never had the opportunity to discover who took their daughter from them. Carmen Chivarella, Maurice's father, passed away in 2006, and Mary Chivarella, Maurice's mother, in 2014. The couple found their final resting place together, laid to rest beside their beloved daughter, Maurice, at the prestigious St. Joseph Slovak Roman Catholic Cemetery in the charming town of Hazleton, Pennsylvania.